She stood in the parking lot holding $47,000 that didn't belong to her. Her hands were shaking. Her 3 children were hungry at home. The rent was overdue. And the man who owned this money had no idea it was missing. What would you do? What she did next will either restore your faith in humanity or break your heart. This is a true story. Welcome to Story by TJ, where we bring you real stories about real people facing impossible choices. I'm so glad you're here with us today. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end of this one because what happens will leave you speechless. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. This isn't just a story about money. It's a story about character, about integrity, about what happens when life tests you in the most brutal way possible. It's about a woman named Sarah Mitchell, a single mother of 3 from a small town in rural Tennessee, whose one decision on a cold February morning in 2019 would change everything. But to understand why that moment mattered so much, you need to know how she got there. You need to understand just how desperate she was. You need to feel what she felt. Because when you do, you'll realize that what she did wasn't just remarkable. It was almost impossible. 3 months before that parking lot moment, Sarah's world fell apart. She was 38 years old, working 2 jobs trying to keep her family afloat after her husband James walked out on them. Just disappeared one day. No warning. No explanation. Left a note on the kitchen table that said he couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't handle the pressure. Couldn't be the man they needed him to be. And just like that, Sarah became the sole provider for 3 kids under the age of 12. Emma was 11. Michael was 8. Little Sophie was just 5 years old. 3 beautiful children who didn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore. 3 kids who still needed to eat, who still needed clothes, who still had to go to school and pretend everything was normal when their whole world had been turned upside down. Sarah worked as a cashier at the local Walmart during the day. Minimum wage, no benefits, barely enough to cover groceries. At night, she cleaned offices downtown. Got off her first shift at 6. Picked up the kids from her neighbor who watched them for free because she knew Sarah couldn't afford childcare. Fed them whatever she could scrape together. Then headed back out at 9 to push a vacuum and empty trash cans until 2 in the morning. She was running on 4 hours of sleep most nights. Her body ached constantly. Her back hurt from standing all day. Her hands were raw from the cleaning chemicals. But she kept going because that's what mothers do. They endure. They survive. They find a way. But by February, surviving wasn't enough anymore. The bills were piling up faster than she could pay them. The landlord had already given her 2 extensions on the rent. He was a decent man, felt bad for her situation, but he had his own family to feed. He told her gently but firmly that if she didn't have the $1,500 she owed by the end of the month, he'd have no choice but to start eviction proceedings. Sarah had 3 weeks. She had $400 in her checking account. She was already behind on the electric bill. The car needed new tires. Emma needed glasses. The school had sent home a notice about overdue lunch payments. And every night when she tucked her babies into bed, she felt like she was failing them. She prayed. Oh, how she prayed. Sarah had grown up in church, grew up believing that God heard every prayer, that He provided for those who trusted Him. Her mama used to say that the Lord never gives you more than you can handle. But lying awake at 3 in the morning staring at the ceiling, calculating and recalculating numbers that never added up no matter how many times she ran them through her head, Sarah wondered if maybe her mama had been wrong. Maybe this was more than she could handle. Maybe some prayers just don't get answered the way you hope they will. But she kept praying anyway because prayer was free and hope was all she had left. Then came that Tuesday morning, February 12th, 2019. Sarah had just finished her early shift at Walmart. It was her day off from the cleaning job, a rare midweek break. She stopped at the grocery store to pick up some things for dinner. Mac and cheese, hot dogs, a loaf of bread. The cheapest things she could find that would stretch across multiple meals. She was walking back to her car, that beat-up 2005 Honda Civic with the cracked windshield and the passenger door that didn't open right, when she saw it. A brown leather briefcase sitting on the asphalt between two cars. Just sitting there, like someone had set it down to load groceries and driven away without it. Sarah looked around. The parking lot was nearly empty. It was 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. Most people were at work. An elderly man was loading bags into his trunk 3 rows over. A young mother was strapping a toddler into a car seat. Nobody was looking for anything. Nobody seemed distressed. She walked over to the briefcase slowly. That feeling in your gut when you know something's not right. When you know you're about to find something that's going to complicate your life. She bent down and picked it up. It was heavy. Expensive leather, the kind that costs more than she made in a week. There was no name tag on it. No identification on the outside. She opened it, and her heart stopped. Money. Stacks and stacks of cash.
Neatly bended $100 bills.
She stood there frozen, the February wind biting at her face, staring at more money than she'd ever seen in her life outside of a movie. Her first thought was, this isn't real. Her second thought was, count it. She couldn't count it there in the parking lot where anyone could see. So she put the briefcase in her trunk, got in her car, and drove. Not home. She couldn't go home. Not yet. Not until she figured out what to do. She drove to the empty lot behind the old textile mill that had closed down 5 years ago. Parked in the back where no one could see her. And then she opened the briefcase again and started counting. $47,000. She counted it 3 times to make sure. $47,000 in cash. Enough to pay her rent for 2 years. Enough to fix her car, buy her kids new clothes, pay off every bill she had and still have money left over. Enough to breathe again. And that's when the war started inside her head. Sarah sat in that abandoned parking lot for 20 minutes just staring at the money. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely hold the bills. $47,000. She kept saying the number out loud, like maybe if she heard it enough times it would start to make sense. $47,000. The briefcase also contained something else. A business card tucked into one of the inner pockets. Robert Henderson, Henderson Construction LLC, with a local address and phone number. And underneath the business card, she found bank deposit slips, contractor agreements, what looked like payroll documents. This wasn't drug money or anything shady. This was someone's business. Someone's livelihood. Some construction company owner who had probably just gotten paid for a big job and forgot his briefcase. A careless mistake that was about to cost him everything. Sarah's mind started racing. She thought about her babies at home. Emma, who needed those glasses so badly she was squinting at the chalkboard in school. Michael, who had outgrown his winter coat 2 months ago and was making do with a hoodie in 30-degree weather. Little Sophie, who still asked why they couldn't go to McDonald's anymore like they used to when Daddy was around. She thought about the eviction notice that would come if she didn't pay rent in 2 weeks. She thought about the electricity getting shut off. She thought about what it would feel like to not be drowning for the first time in 3 months. What it would feel like to sleep through the night without waking up in a panic about money. What it would feel like to walk into a grocery store and buy whatever her kids needed without having to calculate every single penny. Nobody would know. That thought crept into her mind like a whisper. Nobody saw you pick it up. There are no cameras in that part of the parking lot. You could take this money, and no one would ever connect it to you. The owner probably already filed an insurance claim. Big construction companies have insurance for this kind of thing. He'll be fine. He's probably already fine. Rich enough to carry $47,000 in cash. Rich enough to forget it in a parking lot. He doesn't need this money the way you need it. Your children need it. This could be God answering your prayers. Maybe this is divine providence. Maybe you're supposed to find this. Maybe this is your blessing. She felt herself starting to believe it, starting to rationalize. Her mama used to say that God works in mysterious ways. Well, this was pretty mysterious, wasn't it? What were the odds that she, of all people, struggling Sarah Mitchell who could barely afford to feed her children, would be the one to find $47,000 on the exact day she needed a miracle? That couldn't be coincidence. That had to be providence. That had to mean something. She picked up one of the stacks of bills and held it up to the gray February light coming through her dirty windshield. Felt real. Felt like hope. It felt like everything she'd been praying for wrapped up in paper and ink. But then another voice spoke up. Quieter. Steadier. The voice that sounded like her mama. Her mama who had been gone for 6 years, now, but whose words still echoed in Sarah's head during moments like this. Her mama who had raised her in that little Baptist church on Miller Road. Her mama who had worked herself to the bone cleaning houses for rich people but had never once, not even once, taken something that didn't belong to her. Sarah remembered being 9 years old and finding a $20 bill on the floor at the grocery store. She'd been so excited, already planning what candy she was going to buy. But her mama had taken that $20 bill straight to the customer service desk. Told them someone lost it and to hold it in case they came back. Sarah had cried. She'd been so angry. She'd asked her mama why they couldn't just keep it when they needed it so much. And her mama had knelt down, looked her right in the eyes, and said something Sarah had never forgotten. "Baby," she'd said, "we might be poor, but we're not thieves. Money that comes from doing wrong will never do you right. It'll rot in your hands. It'll poison everything it touches. But money you earn honest, even if it's just a little bit, that money is blessed. That money will stretch further than you think. You keep your hands clean, Sarah. No matter how hard it gets, you keep your conscience clear. Because at the end of the day, the only thing you really own in this world is your character. And once you sell that, you can never buy it back." Sarah closed her eyes. She could almost feel her mama's hands on her shoulders, could almost smell the lavender soap she used to use. And she knew, sitting there in that cold car with $47,000 in her lap, that her mama was right. She'd always been right. This money didn't belong to her. It belonged to Robert Henderson. And no matter how much she needed it, no matter how desperate she was, taking it would make her a thief. It would make her exactly the kind of person she'd promised her mama she'd never become. It would make her someone her children shouldn't be proud of. And what kind of example would that set? What kind of lesson would she be teaching Emma and Michael and Sophie if they ever found out their mother stole someone's money because things got hard? She thought about her kids. Really thought about them. Not about what they needed materially, but about what they needed from her. They needed a mother with integrity. They needed a mother who did the right thing even when it hurt. They needed to grow up knowing that character matters more than comfort. That doing right matters more than doing easy. Because if she taught them that it's okay to take what isn't yours when you're desperate, what would stop them from making that same choice someday? What would stop them from justifying their own wrong decisions when life got hard for them? She would be setting them up to fail the same test she was facing right now. But God, it was hard. Harder than anything she'd ever done. She sat there arguing with herself for another 10 minutes. The voice of desperation kept fighting with the voice of conscience. You could keep just some of it. Just enough to get caught up on rent. Just enough to get through this month. He'd never miss 5,000. He'd never miss 10,000. You could return the rest. That would be the compromise. That would be doing the right thing mostly. But Sarah knew there was no such thing as mostly honest. You were either honest or you weren't. You either did the right thing or you didn't. There was no middle ground. No compromise with integrity. Her mama had taught her that too. Finally, Sarah took a deep breath. She closed the briefcase. She put it back in her trunk. And she pulled out her phone. Her hands were still shaking as she dialed the number on the business card. It rang 3 times before a man answered. "Henderson Construction, this is Robert." Sarah's voice cracked when she spoke. She hadn't realized she was crying. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "I found your briefcase." There was silence on the other end of the line. Complete silence for what felt like forever but was probably only 5 seconds. Then Robert Henderson's voice came back, shaky and disbelieving. "You found what?" "My briefcase," Sarah repeated, wiping tears from her face with the back of her hand. "The brown leather one. I found it in the grocery store parking lot about 30 minutes ago. It has your business card inside and a lot of cash. I wanted to call you so you could come get it." Another silence. Then she heard what sounded like a sharp exhale, maybe relief, maybe shock. She couldn't tell. "Where are you right now?" he asked. His voice was careful, measured, like he was talking to someone who might bolt at any second. Sarah gave him the address of the old textile mill. Told him she'd wait there. He said he'd be there in 15 minutes and the line went dead. Sarah sat in her car feeling something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It wasn't peace. It was more like resignation mixed with a strange kind of clarity. She'd made her choice. There was no taking it back now. In 15 minutes, she'd hand over $47,000 and go back to being broke. Go back to wondering how she'd pay rent. Go back to the same desperate situation she'd been in an hour ago. Nothing would change except now she'd know exactly what she'd given up. She'd know precisely what doing the right thing had cost her. And that knowledge felt like it might crush her. She sat there crying, not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears rolling down her face while she waited. She wasn't crying because she regretted her decision. She was crying because doing the right thing hurt so much more than she'd expected it to. Robert Henderson pulled up 12 minutes later in a silver pickup truck with his company logo on the side. He was maybe 60 years old, weathered face, work boots, the kind of man who'd spent his whole life building things with his hands. He got out of his truck slowly, looking at Sarah like he still wasn't sure this was real. She got out too, went to her trunk, and pulled out the briefcase. She walked over and handed it to him without a word. He took it, opened it right there, looked inside, and his whole body seemed to sag with relief. He looked up at her with eyes that were suddenly wet. "Do you have any idea what you just did for me?" he asked. His voice was rough. "This is payroll for my crew. 23 guys who've been waiting 2 days for their checks because I'm an idiot who left this in a parking lot. I thought it was gone. I thought I'd lost everything." Sarah nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. Robert Henderson looked at her closer now, really seeing her for the first time. He saw the exhaustion in her face, the worn-out coat, the old car with the cracked windshield. He saw someone who looked like they'd been carrying the weight of the world. "How much was in here?" he asked. Sarah swallowed hard. $47,000. "I counted it." His eyes widened. "You counted $47,000 and called me anyway." She nodded again. "Why?" he asked softly. It wasn't an accusation. It was genuine wonder. "Because it wasn't mine," Sarah said simply. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "My mama taught me better than that." Robert Henderson stood there for a long moment just looking at her. Then he reached into the briefcase and pulled out a stack of bills. "Here," he said, holding it out to her. "Reward. For being honest. For doing what most people wouldn't do." Sarah stepped back like the money might burn her. "No, sir," she said firmly. "I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because it was right. If I take money from you now, it makes what I did transactional. It makes it about payment." It wasn't about payment. It was about character. Robert Henderson looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "Please," he said. "You have no idea what this means to me. Let me give you something. Anything." Sarah shook her head. She was still crying, but her voice was steady now. "I appreciate it, Mr. Henderson. I really do. But no. Just go pay your workers. They're waiting on you." She got back in her car before he could argue further. Started the engine. Robert Henderson stood in that empty parking lot holding his briefcase, watching her drive away with an expression of absolute astonishment on his face. Sarah made it 3 blocks before she had to pull over because she was crying too hard to see the road. She sat there on the side of the street, gripping the steering wheel, sobbing like something had broken inside her. She'd done the right thing. She knew she'd done the right thing. But right now, the right thing felt like the hardest thing she'd ever done in her entire life. She thought about going home and facing her children. Thought about looking at their faces and knowing she'd had the answer to all their problems in her hands and given it away. How was she supposed to explain that to them? How was she supposed to make them understand? She didn't go straight home. She drove around for another hour, trying to compose herself, trying to figure out what to do next. She thought about picking up extra shifts at Walmart. Maybe they'd let her work overnight stocking shelves. That was $1 more an hour. She thought about asking the cleaning company if they had any additional buildings she could take on. Maybe if she slept 4 hours instead of 5, she could squeeze in another job. Her mind spun through calculations, through possibilities, through desperate mathematics that never quite added up. By the time she finally pulled into her driveway, it was almost 2 in the afternoon. Her neighbor Miss Patricia was sitting on her porch with Sophie playing in the yard. Emma and Michael were doing homework at Patricia's kitchen table. Sarah waved, tried to smile, went inside her own house and collapsed on the couch. She must have fallen asleep from pure exhaustion because the next thing she knew, her children were coming through the front door. Sophie ran to her with that beautiful, unfiltered joy that 5-year-olds have. "Mama, Mama, we made cookies at Miss Patricia's house and she let me have 2. Emma and Michael were quieter, more aware. They'd gotten good at reading their mother's moods over the past few months. They could tell when she was stressed. They could tell when things were bad. And right now, things looked bad. Emma sat down next to Sarah on the couch. "You okay, Mama?" Sarah pulled her daughter close. "Yeah, baby.
I'm okay.
Just tired." "Did something happen?" Emma asked. She was too perceptive, too smart. Sarah wondered sometimes if 11-year-olds should have to be that aware, that careful with their questions. Sarah thought about lying, thought about saying everything was fine. But her mama had also taught her that honesty started at home. So she told them, not everything. She didn't tell them about how much money it was or how desperately she'd wanted to keep it. But she told them she'd found something valuable that didn't belong to her and she'd returned it to the owner. She told them it had been hard, but it was the right thing to do. Sophie didn't really understand. She just nodded and went back to playing with her dolls. But Emma and Michael got it. Michael looked at his mother with these serious 8-year-old eyes and said, "Grandma would be proud of you." And Sarah started crying again. "Come here," she said, and pulled all 3 of her children into her arms. Held them so tight they squirmed and giggled and complained they couldn't breathe. "I love you guys so much," she whispered into their hair. "We're going to be okay. I don't know how, but we're going to be okay." That night after the kids were in bed, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her bills spread out in front of her. She had 11 days until rent was due. She had $400. She needed $1,500. The math hadn't changed. Finding that briefcase and giving it back hadn't magically solved her problems. She was still broke, still desperate, still terrified. But something had changed inside her. Some small hard kernel of self-respect that she hadn't felt in months. She'd been tested and she'd passed. Life had put temptation right in her lap and she'd chosen integrity over survival. That had to count for something. That had to mean something. Her mama used to say that God honors faithfulness. That when you do right, even when it costs you everything, somehow provision comes. Sarah wanted to believe that, needed to believe that. So she closed her eyes and prayed. Not for money this time, just for strength. Just for the ability to keep going. Just for the faith to believe that doing right would somehow, someway lead to something good. She had no idea that her prayer was already being answered. Sarah woke up the next morning to her phone ringing. It was 6:30 in the morning, still dark outside, and she fumbled for the phone on her nightstand with her eyes barely open. The number was local but unfamiliar. She almost didn't answer, figuring it was a spam call or a bill collector, but something made her pick up. "Hello," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "Miss Mitchell," the voice on the other end said. "This is Robert Henderson. We met yesterday. You returned my briefcase." Sarah sat up straight in bed, suddenly wide awake. "Yes, sir, I remember. I hope I'm not calling too early," he said. He sounded nervous, like he'd been rehearsing what he was going to say. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you did yesterday. About the fact that you had $47,000 in your hands and you gave it back without taking a dime. That kind of integrity is rare, Miss Mitchell. It's the kind of thing that deserves to be recognized." Sarah's heart started beating faster. "Mr. Henderson, I already told you I don't want a reward." "I know," he interrupted gently. "I know you said that, but I did some asking around yesterday after you left. Called a friend of mine who knows people in this town. Found out about your situation. About your husband leaving. About you working 2 jobs trying to keep your kids fed. Found out you're about to lose your apartment." Sarah felt her face flush with embarrassment. She didn't like people knowing her business. Didn't like being an object of pity. "Mr. Henderson," she started to say, but he kept talking. "I'm not offering you charity," he said firmly. "I'm offering you a job. A real job. I need someone in my office. Someone to handle payroll, manage the books, deal with clients. Someone I can trust. And yesterday you proved you're exactly the kind of person I can trust. The pay is $45,000 a year with benefits. Health insurance, dental, paid vacation. You'd work regular hours, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. You could stop killing yourself with those 2 jobs. You could be home with your kids at night. Sarah couldn't breathe. She literally could not get air into her lungs. $45,000 a year. Benefits. Normal hours. It was more than she'd made in her entire life. It was the answer to prayers she'd been praying for months. Mr. Henderson, she finally managed to say, I don't have office experience. I've never done payroll or bookkeeping or any of that. I can teach you, he said. You've got something I can't teach. You've got integrity. Everything else is just skills, and skills can be learned. I need you to think about it, Miss Mitchell. I need you to really think about it. Because this offer is real and it's yours if you want it. Can you come by my office this afternoon around 3? We can talk details, I can show you around, and you can decide if it's something you want to do. Sarah said yes before her brain could fully process what was happening. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll be there. Thank you. Thank you so much. She gave him her yes without even thinking about the logistics, without thinking about what she'd tell her kids or how she'd explain this impossible turn of events. She just said yes because sometimes grace arrives so unexpectedly that all you can do is receive it. When she hung up the phone, she sat there in her bed in the dark and started laughing. Not happy laughter exactly. It was the kind of laughter that comes when relief and disbelief collide. The kind of laughter that sounds a little bit like crying. She'd given away $47,000 yesterday. And today she'd been offered a job that would change her entire life. You honor faithfulness. That's what her mama used to say. Sarah hadn't really believed it until this moment. She got the kids ready for school in a daze, moving through the morning routine on autopilot while her mind spun with possibilities. She didn't tell them about the job offer. Didn't want to get their hopes up in case something fell through. But Emma noticed the difference in her. Mama, you're smiling, she said while eating her cereal. Sarah realized she was. She was actually smiling for the first time in months. Just had some good news, baby, she said. I'll tell you about it later. After she dropped the kids at school and went to her shift at Walmart, she couldn't focus on anything. She scanned groceries and bagged items and made small talk with customers. But her mind was somewhere else entirely. At 2:30, she clocked out early, something she never did, and drove to the address Robert Henderson had given her. Henderson Construction was located in a modest building on the industrial side of town. Nothing fancy, just a practical office attached to a large warehouse where Sarah could see trucks and equipment through the open bay doors. She parked and sat in her car for a minute, trying to calm her nerves. This was real. This was actually happening. She walked into the front office and a woman at the reception desk smiled warmly at her. You must be Sarah, she said. Mr. Henderson is expecting you. Come on back. She led Sarah down a short hallway to an office where Robert Henderson stood up from his desk when she entered. He looked different than he had yesterday in the parking lot. More relaxed. He shook her hand and gestured to a chair. Thank you for coming, he said. I want to show you what you'd be doing here and introduce you to some of the team. For the next hour, Robert Henderson walked her through the office, explained the filing system, showed her the payroll software, introduced her to the handful of people who worked in the administrative side of his business. Everyone was friendly, welcoming, normal people doing normal work. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't exciting. But it was stable. It was real. It was everything Sarah needed. When they got back to his office, Robert sat down and looked at her seriously. I want you to understand something, Miss Mitchell, he said. This isn't a pity hire. This isn't me feeling sorry for you. This is me recognizing that character is the rarest commodity in the world, and when you find it, you don't let it walk away. What you did yesterday, returning that money when you were desperate, that told me everything I need to know about who you are. I'd rather have someone with your integrity learning the job than someone with experience who I can't trust. Sarah felt tears coming again. Seemed like all she did lately was cry. But these were different tears than the ones she'd cried yesterday. These were tears of gratitude, of relief, of the overwhelming feeling that maybe her mama had been right all along. Maybe doing the right thing really did matter. Maybe integrity really was its own reward. When can you start? Robert asked. She laughed through her tears. Whenever you need me. How about Monday? He said. That gives you a few days to give notice at your other jobs. Get yourself together. Figure out childcare during normal business hours instead of the crazy schedule you've been keeping. We'll start you on salary from day one. First paycheck will be in 2 weeks. And Sarah, he added, leaning forward, I'm going to advance you $3,000 today. Consider it a signing bonus. You can pay your rent, get caught up on your bills, buy your kids whatever they need. You've earned it. Sarah tried to protest, but Robert held up his hand. This isn't charity, he said again. This is an investment in an employee I believe in. Don't insult me by refusing. She nodded, unable to speak. He wrote her a check right there, handed it across the desk. $3,000. More money than she'd held in her hand since before James left. Enough to keep the lights on and the roof over their heads. Enough to breathe again. She took the check with shaking hands and whispered thank you over and over until the words lost meaning. When she walked out of that office and back to her car, she felt like she was floating. Felt like maybe this was all a dream and she'd wake up back in her nightmare. But the check in her purse was real. The job offer was real. The impossible grace of this moment was real. She drove straight to the bank and deposited the check. Watched the teller process it. Watched the balance in her account change from $400 to $3,400. Then she went to the landlord's office and paid her rent in full. Handed over $1,500 and got a receipt that said paid. The landlord looked surprised but pleased. Glad you figured it out, Sarah, he said kindly. She just smiled. That evening when she picked up the kids from Miss Patricia's house, she sat them down at their little kitchen table and told them everything. Told them about the job, about the regular hours, about the benefits and the salary and the fact that Mama wasn't going to have to work 2 jobs anymore. Told them that sometimes when you do the right thing, even when it's hard, good things happen. Sophie didn't fully understand, but she clapped anyway because her siblings were happy. Michael hugged Sarah so tight she thought her ribs might crack. And Emma, wise beyond her years, looked at her mother and said quietly, Grandma was watching yesterday. Wasn't she? Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face again. Yeah, baby, she said. I think she was. Sarah started her new job the following Monday, and it felt like stepping into a different life. She woke up at a reasonable hour, got the kids ready for school without the frantic rush she'd become accustomed to, and actually had time to make them breakfast instead of just handing them cereal bars as they ran out the door. She dropped them off at school and drove to Henderson Construction with this strange feeling in her chest that she eventually realized was hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that feels like grasping at straws, but the solid kind that comes from knowing things are actually going to be okay. When she walked into the office that first morning, Robert Henderson was already there with coffee made and a desk cleared for her. Welcome to your first day, he said with a smile that reached his eyes. Let me show you how everything works. The learning curve was steep. Sarah had never used accounting software before, had never processed payroll or managed vendor invoices or dealt with client contracts. But Robert was patient. He sat with her for hours those first few days, walking her through every process, answering every question, never once making her feel stupid for not knowing. The other office staff, a woman named Linda who handled scheduling and a younger guy named Marcus who managed the equipment inventory, were just as welcoming. By the end of the first week, Sarah felt like she was actually getting the hang of it. She was good with numbers, always had been, and once she understood the systems, everything started clicking into place. More importantly, she was sleeping again. Real sleep, not the anxious half-sleep of someone waiting for the next disaster. She'd come home at 5:30, spend the evening with her kids, help with homework, make dinner, and actually be present instead of exhausted and distracted. 3 weeks into the job, something happened that Sarah didn't expect. Robert called her into his office on a Friday afternoon. She went in feeling slightly nervous, that old instinct that being called to the boss's office meant trouble. But he gestured for her to sit and his expression was thoughtful, not upset. Sarah, he said, I want to tell you something. I want to tell you the real reason I offered you this job. She looked at him, confused. You said it was because of my integrity. Because I returned the briefcase. He nodded slowly. That's true. But there's more to it than that. There's something I haven't told you. Something I think you deserve to know." He leaned back in his chair, and for a moment he looked older, wearier, like he was carrying a weight he'd been holding for a long time. 5 years ago, Robert began, I lost my daughter. Her name was Katie. She was 26 years old, had just finished graduate school, was about to start her career. She was driving home from a job interview in Nashville when her car broke down on the side of the highway. She called me, told me she'd be fine, said she'd already called a tow truck. But while she was waiting, someone stopped. A man in a pickup truck. He offered to help her. And Katie, being the trusting person she was, let him. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She could sense where this was going, and she didn't want to hear it, but she couldn't look away from Robert's face. From the pain etched in every line. That man robbed her. Robert continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Took her purse, her phone, her laptop. And when she tried to stop him, when she tried to fight back, he hurt her. Left her on the side of that road and drove away. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry." Robert nodded, his eyes wet. A truck driver found her an hour later. Called an ambulance. She survived, physically. But something broke in her that day. Something that never healed. She developed severe anxiety. Couldn't leave the house. Couldn't trust anyone. 6 months later, she took her own life. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Henderson, I don't even know what to say." Robert wiped his eyes. "After Katie died, I became bitter. Angry at the world. Angry at people. I started to believe that there was no goodness left, that everyone was just out for themselves, that kindness and integrity were extinct. I withdrew from everything. Almost shut down my business. My wife left me because I became someone she didn't recognize. I was drowning in cynicism and rage and this belief that humanity was fundamentally broken. But then, Robert continued, about a year after Katie's death, my pastor challenged me. He said I couldn't let one evil man define my entire view of humanity. He said that for every person who does wrong, there are dozens who do right, but we never hear about them because kindness doesn't make headlines. He challenged me to look for the good instead of focusing on the bad. And I'll be honest, Sarah, I didn't believe him. I thought he was naive. So I decided to test it. He paused, measuring his words carefully. That briefcase you found in the parking lot, he said slowly. I left it there on purpose. Sarah's eyes widened. What? Robert nodded. I've been doing it for 3 years. Every few months, I take a briefcase with cash and my business card, and I leave it in a public place. Then I wait to see if anyone calls. I want to know if honest people still exist, if integrity still matters to anyone. Sarah sat back in her chair, stunned. You've been testing people? For 3 years? Robert nodded. And in 3 years, Sarah, do you know how many people called to return it? She shook her head slowly, almost afraid to hear the answer. Before you? 29 people found that briefcase. Not one of them called. Not one. Some kept the money. Some threw the briefcase in a dumpster, probably scared it was some kind of trap. One person even tried to use my business card to commit fraud. But nobody, not a single person, did what you did. Nobody called to return it. You were number 30, and you were the first person in 3 years to restore my faith in humanity. Sarah couldn't speak. The weight of what he was saying pressed down on her like something physical. You mean this whole thing, the job, everything, it was all because of a test? Robert leaned forward. It wasn't a trick, Sarah. The money was real. The situation was real. Your choice was real. I just created the opportunity to see what people would do when they thought nobody was watching. And you, struggling and desperate and with every reason to keep that money, you chose integrity anyway. You chose to do the right thing even though it cost you everything. Do you understand how rare that is? Do you understand what that means? Sarah shook her head, overwhelmed. It means, Robert said gently, that my daughter would have liked you. It means that in a world that took her from me, there are still people worth believing in. It means I was wrong about humanity being broken. It's bruised, maybe. It's hurting. But it's not broken, because people like you still exist. Sarah started crying in earnest now. I didn't do anything special, she said through her tears. I just did what my mama taught me. That's exactly my point, Robert said. Doing the right thing shouldn't be special. Should be normal. But somewhere along the way, we lost that. We started celebrating people for doing the bare minimum of human decency. Your mama taught you well, Sarah. And because of what she taught you, because of who you are, you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. You gave me hope. The two of them sat there in that small office, both crying, both carrying grief and gratitude in equal measure. Finally, Robert stood up and extended his hand. Thank you, he said simply, for being exactly who you are, for proving that goodness still exists, for helping an old broken man believe again. Sarah shook his hand, then impulsively hugged him. They stood there for a moment, two people who'd been through hell in different ways, finding unexpected redemption in a parking lot and a briefcase and a choice that could have gone either way. When Sarah finally left his office and went back to her desk, she sat down and just breathed. The whole world felt different now. The job wasn't just a job. It was a declaration, a statement that integrity mattered, that character had value, that doing right, even when it cost everything, was never wasted. She thought about her mama, thought about Katie Henderson, a young woman she'd never met, but whose tragedy had somehow led to this moment. And she understood something profound. Our choices ripple outward in ways we can never predict. One decision to do right can change not just our own lives, but the lives of people we'll never even know about. That evening, Sarah went home and held her children a little tighter. She told them, age-appropriately, about what Mr. Henderson had shared. Told them that doing the right thing matters more than they could ever imagine. That their character was their legacy. That Grandma's lessons weren't just old-fashioned wisdom. They were truths that could change the world. And looking at their faces, at Emma's thoughtful expression and Michael's solemn nod, and even little Sophie's wide-eyed attention, Sarah knew those lessons would continue. The ripple would keep spreading. 6 months passed and Sarah's life looked completely different. Not just financially, though that had certainly changed. She was caught up on all her bills, had money in savings for the first time in her adult life, and had even been able to buy Emma those glasses she needed and Michael a proper winter coat. But the real transformation was deeper than that. It was in the way she carried herself. The way she no longer felt like she was drowning every single day. The way she could breathe without that constant crushing weight on her chest. She'd become indispensable at Henderson Construction. Robert had given her more responsibilities, trusted her with bigger decisions, and even talked about making her a partner in the business someday. But more than that, they'd become family. Robert was at her house for Sunday dinners. He'd become a grandfather figure to her kids, and Sarah had helped him heal in ways he hadn't expected. Just by being there, by being proof that goodness existed, she'd helped close some of the wounds that Katie's death had opened. One afternoon in late August, Robert called Sarah into his office again. She came in without the nervousness she'd felt that first time 6 months ago. Now she just smiled and sat down, comfortable in this space that had become her second home. I want to show you something, Robert said, pulling out his phone. He opened his social media and turned the screen toward her. It was a video, professionally edited, with gentle music playing in the background. Sarah watched as Robert's face appeared on screen, telling the story of the briefcase test. Telling the story of 29 people who'd failed and 1 woman who'd passed. Telling Sarah's story, though he didn't use her name. He talked about integrity and character and how one person's choice had restored his faith in humanity. The video had been viewed over 2 million times. The comments section was filled with people sharing their own stories of choosing integrity over convenience, of doing the right thing when it cost them something. Why did you make this? Sarah asked, stunned. Because your story matters, Robert said simply. Because in a world that's constantly telling us to look out for ourselves, to get ours, to take whatever we can, people need to hear about someone who did the opposite. They need to know that integrity still exists, that it still matters, that doing right still leads to blessing even if it doesn't always look the way we expect. Sarah scrolled through the comments, reading message after message from people who said the story had inspired them, had made them cry, had reminded them of their own parents or grandparents who'd lived with that same kind of character. Some people shared stories of times they'd been tested and failed, and how this video made them want to do better next time. Others shared stories of times they'd done the right thing and seen unexpected rewards come from it. One comment in particular caught Sarah's attention. It was from a woman in Colorado who wrote, "I found a wallet last week with $600 in it. I was going to keep it because I'm behind on rent and my kids need school supplies. But I watched this video and I thought about what kind of example I was setting. I returned the wallet. The owner gave me a reward that I tried to refuse, but he insisted. It was enough to cover my rent. But more than that, my daughter saw me do the right thing. And that's worth more than any amount of money." Sarah felt tears welling up again. She seemed to cry a lot these days, but they were good tears. Tears of gratitude and wonder at how far-reaching one choice could be. "I never wanted attention," she told Robert. "I just wanted to do what was right." "I know," he said, "and that's exactly why your story needs to be told. Because you didn't do it for recognition. You did it because of who you are." As summer turned to fall, Sarah's life continued to stabilize and grow. Emma was thriving in school, no longer squinting at the board, making straight A's. Michael had joined the soccer team and Sarah could actually afford the fees and the equipment. Sophie was in kindergarten now, reading above her level, bright and happy and secure. The shadow of their father's abandonment was still there, but it was fading. They were building a new normal, a better normal. One where their mother wasn't exhausted and terrified all the time. One where they had enough. Where they were safe. Where they knew that doing the right thing, even when it was hard, was always the answer. Sarah thought about James sometimes, wondered where he was, if he ever thought about the family he'd abandoned. But she didn't feel bitter anymore. In a strange way, his leaving had led to all of this. Had led to her finding that briefcase. Had led to her being tested and passing. Had led to a new life she never could have imagined. On Thanksgiving, Sarah hosted dinner at her apartment. It wasn't fancy, still the same small place, but it felt different now. Felt like home instead of a trap. Robert came, along with Linda and Marcus from the office and Miss Patricia from next door, who'd helped Sarah so much during those dark months. They crowded around her little table and Sarah looked at these faces. These people who'd become her chosen family, and felt overwhelming gratitude. Before they ate, she asked if she could say something. Everyone quieted down and looked at her expectantly. A year ago, Sarah began, her voice shaking slightly. "I was drowning. I thought I'd lost everything. I thought God had forgotten about me. But I learned something important. I learned that our character is tested most when we're at our lowest. And I learned that doing the right thing, even when it costs us everything, is never wasted. That integrity has value that goes beyond money or comfort or convenience." She looked at Robert. "You gave me a job and you changed my life, but more than that, you taught me that my mama was right. That keeping your hands clean matters. That character is destiny." And she looked at her children. "And I want you three to remember this. Remember that your grandmother's lessons saved us. Remember that doing right leads to blessing even when we can't see how. Remember that who you are matters more than what you have." Everyone around the table was crying now, even Marcus, who tried to play it tough. They held hands and Sarah prayed, thanking God for faithfulness, for provision, for the people around this table, for second chances and new beginnings. And somewhere, she felt her mama smiling, felt Katie Henderson smiling too. Two women she'd loved and never met, both somehow present in this moment of grace. The story doesn't end there though, because 6 months after that Thanksgiving, something else happened. Something that would take Sarah's journey in a direction she never expected. But that's a story for another time. If you want to hear what happened next, make sure you're subscribed to Story by TJ because we'll be sharing part 2 very soon. But before we go, I want to ask you something. What would you have done? If you found $47,000 and nobody was watching, would you keep it or return it? Be honest with yourself. And more importantly, what choice are you facing right now where integrity matters? Where doing the right thing might cost you something, but where your character is on the line. Think about it. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one and your stories inspire us. If the story moved you, if it reminded you that goodness still exists, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, doing the right thing is never wasted. Your character is your legacy. Your integrity is your inheritance. Make choices that your children and grandchildren will be proud of. Make choices that honor the people who taught you right from wrong. Make choices that prove that humanity isn't broken, just bruised. From all of us here at Story by TJ, thank you for watching. We'll see you in part 2. God bless you.